Hey everyone, my name is Penny Zanker, and it's time to reset. This podcast goes beyond just navigating change. It's about new ways of thinking about how you can approach challenges, how you can shift your mindset when needed, create some space and grace for yourself so that you can rethink, recharge, and reprioritize when and where needed. Are you ready to unlock your full potential? Thank you for hitting play and sharing this next episode with me. It's time to reset. Hello and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zanker and I'm your host. And today I am excited. We are going to talk all things Gen Z with the expert, Stephen Robertson. Let me tell you a little about Stephen before he comes on here. He's an accomplished author, speaker, trainer, and business leader with demonstrated history of successful working across multiple industries. He's the author of internationally acclaimed book, Aliens Among Us, 10 Surprising Truths About Gen Z, which we're going to dig into. And he provides invaluable insights into the behaviors, values, and mindsets of emerging generation, making him the go-to resource for businesses looking to engage with Gen Z. And who can't today? I mean, that's where it's at.
Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And yes, who can ignore them, right?
They're the next generation coming into the workforce. And if you can't work, everybody's different. And if we don't understand this generation, then we're not going to be able to manage them effectively. And that is already an issue with the millennials, I believe. So what are you seeing are the challenges as this new generation comes in the workplace, and I just want to ask you like 1,000 questions, and then we'll go into maybe how they're different from the millennials and that type of thing. So what are some of the challenges people are seeing?
Well, let me answer it this way, Penny, and thank you again for having me with you today. The real issue is just perspective. We need a significant shift in perspective to really position ourselves well to navigate the journey we're on right now. We have truly never actually encountered a generational shift like we're going through right now. In fact, the data is crazy and compelling. And so there has actually never been a generation like Gen Z. There's a way I can show you what that looks like. And the world has actually shifted and shifting. And that's why I say the perspective is the biggest thing people need to be realigned in terms of how to engage, what matters to a generation. What I'm seeing and excited about is that when people see this shift in perspective, people are smart enough to know what to do with that information, and it works across all generations. So what we're learning about this next generation, Gen Z, 52% of the world's population is under the age of 30, by the way. And
Wow.
52% of the world's population.
That's interesting. So, and how many do you, by any chance, know how many are at the senior level? Because it seems like then there's very few in the middle, because I think there's a lot of baby boomers, right?
So, yep, they are. So let me say this. 32% in 2020 of the workforce was already Gen Z, which means the balance of that workforce is made up of millennials, Gen X, and boomers. And so, there is data points around it. It does vary from industry to industry. But so that's the first thing that's really interesting. 52% of the world's population is under the age of 30. And that's more or less where Gen Z's cutoff is right now. And everything that is coming since then, in other words, in the last 30 years, is really fundamentally different. And so, we've got to really understand that they're the customer, they're the new employees. And what we found is what works with them in terms of coaching, training, engagement, actually works across every generation. So that's really exciting, right?
That is exciting.
Yep,
but
really
interesting that it doesn't go the other way around, that the things that you might do for a Gen X isn't going to work for a Gen Z.
And that's because the world has changed. The world has really, really changed. I have this analogy, and it's around something I call the perfect storm. So the perfect storm is really 4 things that have happened to the world that have made the world very different. Now, every generation has navigated something like this, but never at this scale. So every generation that we track since the greatest generation, the silent generation, all the way through, they all flip on a number of things. So in other words, they start to behave differently, they value different things, they engage differently, they buy, they sell, they communicate. So that's always happened, right? And that's how generations change. But these 4 things have changed this generation so dramatically that That's why my book's called Aliens Among Us. I wanted people to get a sense of like, they're just not like any other generation.
Mm-hmm.
And those four things are obviously technology is one of the main things. World news is the second. Social media is the third, and parenting and leadership are the fourth. The one's probably the strangest to you as a listener is world news. There's a thing called mean world syndrome. And so that's a cognitive bias that was studied in the 1970s. And really what it just shows you is that, well, it showed at the time that the more violent television that you watch, the more irrationally fearful you are of the world outside. And so you fast forward and look at what world news is today, 24/7 plugged in, knowing what's going on around the world, and you understand how world news has got a significant impact on how this generation is wired.
But also fake news. Like, I mean, does that come into play as well? Because
absolutely does.
Everyone is also not being fed real news or
so who knows? Yeah, so who knows what the real news is? That's the point. And there's a thing called a curated stream. So if I'm in a certain curated stream, only get a certain brand of news and never know what is the real news. So what this has done, Penny, is this. Here's the analogy. The analogy is this. Everybody that's a millennial or older, imagine that they're blue paint or blue people. I call them blue people. Let's imagine blue paint because that's the analogy. And this perfect storm I've just described to you is yellow paint. So you pour a bucket of yellow paint into a bucket of blue paint and you slowly stir it. And what happens at the center, it starts to turn green.
Right.
Here are the two real things that you said, what am I seeing? Here's the two things, right? The first of the two things is Gen Z and Alpha generation, that's the younger of the two, have never, ever lived at a time where they were blue. They've only ever been green. In other words, they've only ever lived in a time where the influence of this perfect storm has been entire for their lives. So they've never lived at a time of blue. But the thing that's more scary for most people and why there's a perspective shift required is that blue paint with yellow ink can never turn blue again. It can only stay green, which means what we are seeing for the first time really in recorded human history is that there's not a pass down from generation to generation that become blue. We've now got a generation of millennials and older blue people that have to actually turn green to be effective and live in this world today. And I can tell you a few ways the world is already green to show you that. But does that analogy make sense? So we've got a bunch of green people.
I love it. It makes great sense. And I think that's like, let's just let that land for people because sometimes we need those type of simple analogies for us to really get it, right? And that is, I think anyway, you can never go back to the past anyway. We're all changed, but that just gives it such a real way to understand is, that once it's mixed, you can't go back. And it makes sense that new generation has only been influenced and affected by that change, the green. It makes total sense. So I'm tracking.
How they live their life in the world, how they think, how they engage, communicate. And then, things like COVID and AI have really amplified that significantly. But I can show you just two quick scenarios of how the world is green, right? And there's a couple of ways you, as a blue person, me as a blue person, are already green as well. So there's actually a number of ways, but I'll give you two quick scenarios. The first is this. We live now, the green world is a world where we have access over ownership. So that's a mind-boggling concept. And again, when that lands, everything is different. So what that means is this. There is a time when the blue people owned everything. We owned videos. We owned Encyclopedia Britannica. We owned music. Like we owned everything, right? I own every song look at that, 444. Every song that's ever been sung, I have access to right now. Every song that's ever been sung. Before, I used to buy an album for, I don't remember, $20, and I could buy a song for $1 or 99 cents, whatever it was, right? I had those VHS cassette tapes. Now I have nothing in my house. We grew up with Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah, totally.
I was like, let me read about that. Now I'm so much wiser, and right? Now, where we live today is subscription world. Everything is subscription. So think about how important that is. I work for you, Penny, and then I don't. I have an Uber. I don't need a car. I watch Netflix, then I don't, right? And so what that means is this. We have got a generation of green people that have never, ever had to be loyal to anything because it's there to serve them. So when it comes to Netflix, you turn it on like a light switch. I want it. And when it's boring and not compelling, you turn it off, right?
Right.
AI is agreeing with me. That's a really good thing.
That is a good thing.
Right.
So wait a second. So I just made a connection and I just want to, because I think it's also interesting. So you're saying which I never thought about this, that this generation has a different definition and understanding of loyalty because they haven't experienced it in the same way that we all have because we held and owned these things. Wow, that's mind-blowing.
My dad got a gold watch, Penny, for working for 50 years at Siemens. Okay. Now it's a whole different thing. The salary that you get paid is your subscription. They're paying you a subscription. And here's what this does. The reason I brought it up in terms of loyalty is this. We can't be surprised when a generation that's never had to, they've always turned things on and off when they've wanted it, right? I don't have anything in my house to play a record on, a VHS cassette tape. Everything is streaming, and when I pay for it, I get it. So when an employee says, I don't want to work anymore, I want to go there, and we're like, but why? And they're like, well, it's not compelling and fun to be here. And you're like, well, the work's not about compelling and fun. And they're like, well, why not? Everything else in my life is. So I'm going somewhere else, right? So that's the first thing, and it's massive. Even in relationships, think about this. I said this, don't do this at home, people. I said to my wife, our anniversary was coming up. I said, darling, your subscription is coming due. I just want you to know that. So depending on how the celebration of our anniversary goes, it did not go down well. But the point I was trying to make was real, right? That's how we look at everything, relationships, because we don't own anything. And so it changes your mindset. And this generation has never, ever lived in a time where ownership has really been a thing in their lives.
Okay, so hold on, I need to process this. So clearly, like you think about, okay, then divorce is going to get 10 times worse.
And it has.
Right? But you said they're all under 30. So they're just like, they're just coming into getting into marriage and things like that. So I'm interested in following that because at the same time, so let me challenge a little, just, it's processing because I think people will. So I also thought and understood that the under 30 has a much stronger sense of purpose. So, right? So, but I'm thinking, okay, it's not loyalty, but if there's a strong sense of purpose, then that may hold them together with someone in their relationship. It may hold them together in a company that has purpose. So what's the difference between loyalty and purpose there? And how do leaders, I know there's so much more we could talk about, and we'll probably have to have a second session because I'm so curious. But so how do we just take that one piece and navigate that? So they're less loyalty, but higher purpose. Is that true that they're higher purpose? And how do we deal with that?
Yeah. So just remember, less loyalty isn't the statement truly. The statement is that they're in a green world, and the green world is subscription-based.
Right.
And so less loyalty might be one of the outcomes we would see and want to challenge as blue people not having lived in a green world, right? So, but here's the thing. The purpose is a big deal. And so what you have with this generation is they're actually the most cause-driven generation we've ever encountered. Now, they haven't yet entirely figured out what to do with causes yet because they're still growing in terms of age. It's on a process. But when you have an engaging, meaningful conversation, content, workplace, they are all in. So I'm not saying they're flaky. I'm just saying that the world has become a subscription model and everybody's learning to live there. They've just learned to live there faster, right? So they are very purpose-driven. And what it means for employers and leaders and even parents is that you actually have to become the most compelling content in your own child's life because we live in a content world now. That's one of the green shifts. So as a parent, I speak to lots of parents, and I work with parents, and I work with a lot of CEOs and leaders, and that is a foreign concept. And I'm like, well, please understand, there are compelling leaders and parents out there. And if you can't be compelling, then you will not stay, they will not stay subscribed to you. There is so much, that's the mean world syndrome idea. There's so much content coming at you on a daily basis to process that when you look at the 1,000 things you have to process, you will absolutely find 15 things that are really compelling. And so you'll go to those and the others will just be cut out. Even in the workplace, the employers that get that, we use something called an invisible curriculum, and we do this whole upskill thing in the workplace to keep people engaged. It's incredible. And what does it revolve around? It revolves around meaningfully engaging with your employees, building a relationship with them in a way that really matters. And that's where the shift has happened. And that shift is applicable to every generation. So when the leaders start to behave slightly differently because they start to catch what an 8-second attention span, or it's actually an 8-second filter looks like, what curation looks like, we haven't touched on those yet, but those are concepts that come into play, what this green world looks like, and they start to make adjustments, the outcome and the fruit is amazing because it's just simply understanding it and then adjusting your behavior accordingly. You don't know differently until you know differently, right? You always believe what you think until someone shows you that your thinking is not accurate. So did that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's a second thing that comes with that if you want me to dive into that.
Yeah, dive in.
So there's actually a bunch more, but I'm just going to share to you. The second one is something called information over application. And so again, if you look at the phone here, we have access to all information that there ever has been, right? So the role of the older generation has moved from something I call sage on stage. I'm the guy with all the knowledge. Come before me and I will coach you, train you, and tell you what to do because you don't know anything, right? That came from the second industrial revolution. That's how we journeyed all the way through. But you'll be surprised that schools, learning institutions, and many businesses are still behaving like we're in the second industrial revolution. We're in the fourth industrial revolution. We're in a thing called Web 3, and everything is different. So here's why I want you to know. Gen Z have access to all information, so they don't need me to tell them anything. But the beautiful blend here from a leadership perspective, from an older generation perspective, is the application. Because everybody knows that knowledge or information without application can sometimes be really complicated. I taught my son to drive a stick shift car. The first day, Penny, we nearly broke up. It was horrible.
I learned how to drive stick myself. Unfortunately, I didn't have to teach my kids, but I know it's like riding a horse.
Blessing in disguise. So we just fight. And that Saturday evening driving in some business parking lot, right? Sunday morning, we're not talking, but he has to speak to me because I'm going to show him, can we go again, Dad? We go. He gets in the driver's seat the first time. And I say something like this. His name's Jeremy. Jeremy, you see, I told you. And he says to me something along these lines. Don't tell me you see anything, Dad. I spent 2 hours on YouTube last night and they showed me how to do it properly. My point is, and that's a true story.
Oh, yeah. My son learned on YouTube how to do parallel parking. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. And so it's about where we come in is we come in with application. I see you've got the information. I've had some experience in life. I can help you with the application. And you see what changes now? Now you become compelling because you're no longer sage on stage. You're like, can I help you with that? And that's a major shift from the sage on stage, SOS, to a GPS, a guide positioned by the side. And that's what we teach people. There's a place for SOS. As a coach, learning a new skill, that's where SOS works. Do this, kick the ball like this, run out of the store because there's a fire. But the most effective model right now is the GPS model, a guide positioned by the side. I come alongside my son. You want to learn to drive, stick shift? Well, let me help you with that. Let me take my information and overlay that programming on your wiring, because there's wiring in this programming. And that makes a major, major difference, which means our role has changed. And coming out with like, do it this way, the answer you'll get and you should get is, but why? I've gone through a number of different experiences where I've told a younger generation to do it this way because I know it works. I've done it. And then I've given them free rein and they've done it differently. I hated it and it actually works. And I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm learning too, right? So they're incredibly, incredibly smart, not only articulate, but innovative generation, globally speaking. This is the first time, actually millennials and them, the first time we've had so much data, Penny, on any generation. It is unbelievable the amount of data we have. Right? And so we can actually tell globally, and that's another thing that's really shifted. Millennials weren't a global force yet. Gen Z are behaving almost the same globally. Now, of course, there's a cohort in a certain country that likes certain music, that likes certain food. But generally speaking, their behavior is global, which we've never seen before, not even with millennials.
I want to come back to the why question, right? Because I know that a lot of older generations, they hate that, right? Because in their perspective, you don't ask why, you just do it. I said to do it like this, so you just do it. So, it puts that into perspective is that the why is to understand the application. Like it's not a defiant why.
Absolutely, yes.
Of course, unless it's your kids, sometimes it might be.
Right.
I want to qualify that, but I think a lot of times that it's mistaken that they want to understand the process. They want to understand the application. As you said, they might have another way of approaching it, and they want to know why is this way the better way, and it's not. It's meant to be a learning tool.
The why.
Do you have anything you want to say to that point?
If you look at something like ChatGPT, what ChatGPT taught us was a lot of things, but in part it taught us this as well. When we had Google, we would ask Google a question and it would give us 1,000 different options to consider. What ChatGPT has taught us is the right question is the key to knowledge. It's not about what knowledge, because I have it all. I have to ask the right question. So there's a generation that's growing and grown up knowing that asking questions is how you figure out who you are, where you are, and how you operate within that space. We also rarely, and as sad as it sounds, because the world is turning green, the only organizations, leadership that will be future-proof are the ones that recognize this and start to behave in a green fashion. So it's not just like the world has gone green overnight. There's still some really powerful blue concepts that are important. But let me just tell you this one last thing as to the why. As soon as the blue people recognize that there are 4 muscles that the green world does not really help you grow or exercise, okay, then you will recognize your muscles in those areas are getting a little weaker, but that Gen Z's muscles in those areas are really weak. And here's what those 4 muscles are. Perseverance, which some people call grit. Communication, 35% of their communication is digital already, Penny.
Great. Yeah.
We've got perseverance, communication, problem solving, and gratitude. Those 4 muscles don't sound significant. When that lands and you recognize what that means in terms of how you navigate the world and your behavior, it is unbelievable. So when the blue people recognize that, we use this invisible curriculum to help them strengthen those muscles. All of a sudden, you start to see them behaving really, really differently. But you've also got to see that those muscles are not developed primarily because the green world doesn't really need it in the same way as it did. Now, 65% of the kids that are in 6th grade this year are going to work in jobs that don't yet exist. Wow, let that land. Okay.
Right.
Which means by us helping them grow those 4 muscles, we are helping prepare them, because a lot of the things we're learning in school and even the practices we do are not going to really be helpful. So as to the why, perspective shift is important. So the blue generation, when you give them a lot of data and show them what's happened, they can process that. They've been around. They've seen things happen. And as soon as they behave a little bit differently with the younger generation and they see the outcomes different, then all of a sudden they make the equation, they figure out the math, and they're like, wow, this really does work. So it's not so much about this is what I want, they must do it my way. Most leaders are looking for the most efficient way to grow their businesses and grow their people. And they're starting to recognize that old methods are not creating or generating the same kind of outcomes. And that's what's having them start a journey of understanding differently.
Absolutely. Wow, I still have so many questions. So let me just ask 2 more things. So one thing is, so here's a situation that I heard about. So there was a student. So what's a student today? A senior is what, an alpha or a Gen Z?
For the most part, alpha only starts at about 12. So a senior is
okay, so it's a Gen Z. Okay, so there was a rule that the teacher had that said that the lowest grade will be taken off. And so of these quizzes, so do your best, but the lowest one, you'll get a pass. So this child decided they already had a good grade in everything, and they handed in the paper it was the last quiz of the year, and handed it in without doing it. And the teacher was mad. So how do you explain, like, I get on both sides.
It's genius.
I get the logic behind it, and I get why the teacher is disappointed and upset, because that wasn't the purpose of it. Because you didn't even try, right? So how do you bridge that gap?
So first of all, the student didn't miss. The teacher missed. Why did the teacher miss? Because the teacher didn't take the time to explain. There was an assumption that the students would get it, and most of them probably did. But these kids are crazy smart. And the letter of the law, he or she was perfectly right. Okay?
Absolutely.
The fact that that person's grades were good up until that point means they weren't a bad student. They just saw, okay, well, there's a loophole. I remember my kid, they had senior skip day, and all the seniors skipped. I'm like, what? And they're like, no one's going to school. I'm like, okay, so it's the same thing, right? So there's a rule there, and it just shows you that communication matters, right? Communication really matters more than it ever has. And so That
But would he have been better off as a teacher not communicating that and just dropping off that last quiz?
possibly.
Because that might happen. But then you could argue that that's not being transparent or right. So,
And it sounds like it happened to one student, maybe more. But the point is just this. There's really no harm, no foul. Both can learn, right? So
right.
I would have had a conversation with the student saying, hey, listen, this was my intent. By you doing this, you kind of really you skirted what we were trying to do, right? But by the same token, I should have done a better job explaining to you my motives, right?
Yeah, every one of those. But, that could, just to put it into perspective, that can happen with somebody of any generation, right? Or right? It's communication can go wrong in all sorts of ways. And so it's a way for us to learn. I just thought that was I just wanted to get
great story, right? Great story. Smart kids. I love it.
And so lastly, because we're running out of time, but I'd love to have you come back because I feel like this is so pertinent when we talk about taking back time and being more strategic in how we face the future. So I have a concept that is coming out in my new book that's called The Reset Mindset. And it's really about how we need to step back. It's about dynamic reassessment as what we need in the future. So we don't get too far along, that we're constantly stepping back to get perspective so that we can realign around best solutions. So I love that you framed this as it's just about getting an understanding and perspective. How would you define a reset mindset, not knowing anything else other than what I just said?
Penny, I'm excited to read that. Okay, so make sure that I can. Because what it aligns with for me is the fact that where we live right now is really in a bite-sized economy. So there's a thing called an 8-second attention span. All the major publications have written about it. It's actually wrong, by the way. Quote me, not them. It's an 8-second filter, right? And so really what the 8-second filter does means you
assess
what you want to process as opposed to you can only focus for a certain time. That's not true. We can actually focus.
Right.
But where you're going with that is, where I was going with that was these bite-sized pieces. If you look at it, short-term, small goal setting is in essence what I'm referring to. Always gives you a chance to reset. So you take a step, not literally, you take a step, you look where you are, you assess, am I still on the, have things change because our world is changing so fast around us? Okay, no, continue. It also does something really powerfully in brain science, in the neurochemicals of what happens in your brain, is not especially, but in all of our brains, when you are able to achieve and then take a reset, look where you are, and then validate where you're going to go next. So without knowing where you're going with that concept, what I think I understand about it is like, yes, not only do we need it for the next generation, we absolutely need it across the board. That mechanism or some theology around or a theory around how you take those steps and how you take a moment to take a breather and see where you are, reevaluate before you go forward, absolutely critical. There are so many moving parts. Some will argue there always have been. The dynamics, if we started to go through the data, it would blow your mind. The dynamics of where we live today, we've never lived in a time like this. So taking that step well and carefully is critical. So I'm not sure if I've got close to where you're going with it, but that's what it makes me think of. And yes, we desperately need to be in that space. I preach that as well.
Yeah. I mean, what you were saying about validation in our brain, right? That's the dopamine and the momentum, right? So that we get more energy and connected to that we're heading in the right direction. Because I do a fun comparison. You talked about one step at a time. So I do a hotter, colder game. You use the blue and the green people, and I use the hotter, colder game. That it's only, if you walk into a room and you're playing this game and you just stand there, what happens?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Right.
Nothing happens if you just stand there, right? You have to take a step, and with each piece of feedback, you are able to get to your destination and to your goal much faster. So I'm all about the easy metaphors as well.
Love it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find out more information about you and get connected with you?
Thank you, Penny. Probably the easiest place is on my website, Stephen J. Robertson. Stephen Robertson wasn't available. Okay, that's why we had to put the middle name in there. My mom was thrilled. StephenJRobertson.com is probably the easiest way. Love to connect with people. This is a conversation that I'm really passionate about. So that would be amazing.
Awesome. Well, you can tell your passion, and I'm glad because this is a topic that's really important for everyone going forward as we move into whatever percentage, is going to be in the workforce, but where the pace is only picking up. And so we've got to know how we can work better together. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Penny.
And thank you all for being here. I don't know about you, but me, mind blown. So definitely check out Stephen's stuff, get his book, get connected with him, because I think we can learn a lot from him and get some really important new perspectives. So my name is Penny Zenker, and this is Take Back Time. We'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thank you for spending this time with me. It really means a lot. If you're feeling a little off, distracted, overwhelmed, stuck, or just out of sync, remember that's your signal to reset. And that's all it takes, just recognizing one reset moment at a time. So stay tuned for more tips, tools, tricks, stories, strategies, all here on Time to Reset. We'll see you in the next episode.